A few extra minutes. Thanks for your patience. Oops. I'm not trying to throw things at you, honestly.
Sure.
And we will go to our Pledge of Allegiance now. Now that we're back in public session. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yawning. It's too early to be yawning.
Oh, yeah. We have our consent agenda. Some of the warrants were in the packet, and then all were in the packet.
Mhm.
I remember the email, that's why I was thinking that
Uh-huh.
maybe those had not.
That was just I didn't have time to check the packet, so I
Okay,
just said.
thank you.
Mhm. But I did double check that they were all in the packet.
And the other three items under 3 were also all in the packet.
Mhm. Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any questions on that? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Consent agenda passes 5-0.
Yeah,
5-0.
no.
I can count. I'm like, how many of us are here?
Just write it down so the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And that brings us to public comment. If anyone on Zoom is here for public comment, if you could raise your hand on Zoom, we can bring you in for that comment. And I don't think we have anybody in the room explicitly for public comment, it looks like.
Just confirming we are also live on YouTube. I know with the change to Education Channel, I've just
Yep.
been watching that.
Yep, thank you. Okay, seeing no public comment, we will move on to our informational updates, starting with the superintendent and assistant superintendent updates.
Thank you. First thing, I want to share with everybody that we all received the different letters from Stony Brook about the date in April 2024. We have started the process of looking at our next year's calendar. I believe Sean is the representative, the liaison. We'll be actually establishing a meeting when we come back after the new year to look at all that. We've been rolling over the dates to see what, if we were to just roll everything over, what would that look like? A couple of things that we're noticing is that even just some of the different things that we have included this year will change for next year. For example, Diwali would take place on a weekend. Lunar New Year is something that we had been talking about. That's also still going to take place on a weekend next year. So we'll look at all the different things that was part of our conversation this year, and we'll look to see what that looks like for next year, and we'll come back and start that after the new year.
There should be fewer elections, too.
There should be fewer
That'll help.
elections. Good point. Thank you. Yes, right. That's true. All these different things that we're playing into this year's calendar. I wanted to congratulate Molly Rendish. She's an 8th grader at Stony Brook. She was named the winner of the Massachusetts Educational Theater Guild's middle school monologue competition this last weekend. Interestingly enough, Stony Brook has had a winner named in this competition for the last 6 years.
Wow.
I just also want to congratulate Miss Watson. I think the environment that she creates there, the opportunities for the students, it's fantastic. And so I know that they've had a lot of different ways in which students have participated, whether it's been in writing, whether it's been performing, whether it's been designing, and they've always the students have always had a positive experience with that. On last Friday, I was able to participate in a virtual restorative justice workshop with the Center for Restorative Justice from Suffolk University, along with District Attorney Marion Ryan's office. It was a full day of virtual workshops, which is something that we haven't been asked to do in a long time, and was an interesting thing to then sit on a computer screen for an entire day, interacting with people, having great conversations. I thought it was They pointed us to some additional resources, which I thought was excellent. I was able to connect with some other superintendents as well as police chiefs from other areas. It was really valuable that I think we can talk more about later. We did have Dean Murphy and our athletic director, Mr. Bunyan, attended the Addressing Hate in School Sports event that took place at TD Garden, which was sponsored by the MIAA, the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, and Governor-elect Maura Healey from her office as Attorney General. Some of the feedback that both Dean Murphy and Mr. Bunyan shared with me was that they were actually really happy to see that a number of the things that they had already started doing with things that they were talking about at this conference, which I thought was great. They felt good about that. They also shared that the DCL principals and athletic directors had already come together and created a brand new code of conduct and expectations for fans that they're sharing. The entire league is sharing it with all of their all I can think of is watermark, which is not the right word. I'm thinking of the different like our seals, right? So that all of the towns are associating and signing off on this same piece, so that people are seeing this as a unified expectation, specifically for the spectators, which I think is great. They've talked about the importance of having meetings with the captains and the refs before events, which is something that I know Mr. Bunyan had been doing, which was great. And then the last thing I just wanted to share was I thought that Gloria, Catherine, and I had an excellent meeting we met for a while on the really wordsmithing and talking about the core values and the vision for the Strategic District Improvement Plan. I'm going to be bringing that same information to the DEI team in January, and some of the SACs are still even looking at that as well too. So I feel really optimistic. I want to thank both of you for your support in helping, because that can, well, you both know as policy members, and we talked about that quite a bit. The wordsmithing aspect of things can be quite time consuming. Did you have anything additional?
I just want to highlight the counseling department at WA in their newsletter. Last year, when Lauren Clark came on board as the coordinator 9 through 12, they had begun to share out this monthly newsletter, and it's just filled with lots of great resources from tutoring to senior capstones, because we know those students are very much counting down the months to dive into that portion of their senior year. There's articles and webinars and resources for caregivers and for students as well. So just looking at it, it's in nice digestible chunks. There's always great information. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check that out.
Okay, how about school committee updates?
I have something nice to talk.
Okay.
I mean,
Nice is good.
Nice is
Just
good.
to say a thank you. Chris also joined me last Wednesday. Or was it Wednesday? I can't even remember at this point.
Last week. It was
There
definitely
we
last
go.
week, I can tell you that.
At WA for the calendar
Oh, that was excellent.
event
It was
presentation.
Thursday.
Thursday, there we go. And just to say, it's now a highlight for me this time of the year. I mean, the artwork is incredible. The students are just so, I mean, it's so personable as well, and how, if anyone has been, and it's just a lovely morning to kind of really, in a very informal, not a big show way, to kind of really just appreciate, I mean, the time and effort, I mean, the hours that went into that, the artwork that is produced in that calendar, which apparently has been going for a very long time. I won't give away, because apparently it's tied with how long Mr. Antonelli has been principal or in the school.
No, he was a student.
He was a
Students,
student,
that's
right.
right. But I have to say, I really appreciate the time and effort that went in, and the appreciation for being invited. Well done to everybody involved. It was such a lovely morning.
And I think those calendars will probably show up in our school committee mailboxes in the coming days or weeks or whatever. So it's a nice thing that they do, and they really are great. And
Yeah.
I will say, I'm not a big paper calendar person, but our kitchen for the
Yeah.
last 6 years or whatever has had, that's our family calendar is
And all the
art.
artwork then goes on display in Muffins and Maine in
Yes, that's really
January.
cool.
Right.
And they typically sell the calendars there too, or so I think, so.
My daughter was picked for September.
Of course.
Oh, that's great.
So it's like I have a soft spot
You
in my
do?
heart for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Catherine, too, because I was going to add that on my list, and I forgot about it. One of the things that I just thought was extraordinary was the way in which the two teachers provided such unbelievably specific
Yeah, personal,
feedback
yeah.
Amazing.
as to why pieces were selected,
Yeah.
the criteria for it. I mean, the students were clearly so proud of what, and they knew exactly the skills that they were working on for that. And I just thought it was a wonderful example of the power of feedback.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
no, it was
Yeah.
such a gorgeous morning.
No, it's a really nice tradition. It's a really nice tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. While we're talking about arts at WA, I was reminded when you were talking about the Stony Brook Theater accolade that at Westford Academy Theater Arts, they're doing a series of student-written 10-minute plays over the next couple weeks. And so they've done this before, but there are a number in the dozens, a couple dozen at least, students who have written 10-minute plays in their Play Lab class. And so those will be put on December 21st, so that's in 2 days, December 22nd, and then again, January 5th and 6th. And they're kind of splitting it up, so each night there'll be a handful of plays, of 10-minute plays. And so it's called Reflections of Us. It'll be in the Performing Arts Center, but they build like an arena setup on the stage, so it's a little more intimate, and that's something folks might want to check out.
That's fun.
Well, that's a great segue, because I happen to be on that stage today, and I was lucky enough to go up into the catwalk.
Ooh.
I knew you'd be jealous, right?
I've been up there, so it's all good.
All right, fine. So
I haven't. I'm jealous.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
you can
That's
make it.
okay. Don't look at him.
So I spent the day tagging along with Jeff Goodwin, Director of Facilities, and our SMMA team as they did their facilities walkthrough of WA. We walked from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Oh my God.
with 0 breaks.
Wow.
We covered every inch of that school. We were up on the roof, we were in the boiler room, we were in the cafeteria, we were in the kitchen, we were in the dark room, we were in the chem labs, like just everywhere. It was eye-opening, it was awesome. I took some pictures, I tried to document it so that was the only one my schedule allowed me to really go to, so that we have that lens behind the scenes for when we get that report to really understand how they put all that information together. There was a team of 6 individuals from SMMA. One was focused on electrical, one was focused on structural, HVAC, telecom, plumbing, and an architect. So you could see them each kind of
Yep.
look for cracks, and one looked for sprinklers.
There were no cracks though. No cracks.
And they were, documenting each in their own way. It was just really cool to be able to see, what will go into the really comprehensive report that I think we're going to get. It's exciting to think about. So,
And they
It's
had
really
a team
cool.
on Friday in all that rain.
oh geez,
The storm that we had on Friday,
Yeah.
they were touring on Friday too.
oh geez.
Yeah.
Well, and to think that they're doing that in all of our schools.
Yeah.
Right,
That
right,
level
right, yes.
of attention and detail
Yeah.
to assess.
Yeah,
what
I
we
mean,
have.
like,
Yeah.
this original schedule was to go to WA and Christopher today, and they just quickly realized WA was going to be everything. And I was a little bummed my schedule didn't allow me to make it to some of our older buildings. I was really hoping to make it to Day and Robinson and Abbott. But I feel like WA gave me enough because it's our biggest school. It's got so much complex programming inside of it that it seemed like if I could understand what they did at WA, then I could translate that into really all the buildings. So it's really cool and tiring. I literally fell asleep on the couch.
Got your steps in.
So you saw the pool on the roof.
Yeah.
The third floor
The third
pool.
floor
Yes.
pool, yeah.
Yes, I did. And speaking of tours, we also had our last curriculum tour at NAB-NASIT 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at you. You were there.
I was.
Me, Catherine, and Sean did our walkthrough there with the curriculum coordinators, and it was lovely as always.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was our final one of that.
My favorite being the pre-Ks.
I
on
know.
that classroom.
Great.
Mhm.
Gloria?
There were also several of us in attendance for the interviews for the town manager finalists. And congratulations to the select board for having picked, I guess they have an offer out. I don't know if it's official yet, but they have an offer out for a new town manager. And I suppose also best wishes, of course, to Jody Ross in the closing days of her tenure, working towards her retirement soon.
Yeah.
It was a fun morning at Town Hall.
Riveting.
Riveting. It was, actually.
Yeah, it was.
I was happily watching it from home.
Yeah, it was fun. That as well.
Lots of cups of tea.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
All right, student update.
All right, so last Wednesday we had our advisory. So the seniors had a capstone presentation, the juniors with midterm exam tips, the freshmen with a mental health presentation, and then the sophomores with a GAD post lesson, and then all the grades also took the panorama survey.
Oh.
And then along with that, for midterms are coming up in the middle of January, and they're back to the old schedule, so you have half day, 2 classes, and then it's also on Thursday, Friday, and then you have the weekend, and then Monday, Tuesday. And then there are also winter decorations around the school, kind of stress relieving. It's nice to see everything decorated. And winter break is also coming up, and with that, for seniors, there's college decisions coming out throughout the winter break up to January, with most ED decisions, which is early decision, coming out in the last week. And yeah, that's about it.
Great. What's
See.
going on? Thank you.
And the Student Advisory Committee had another great meeting. We were talking about the budget process and kind of walking through the budget presentation and how the budget works. So that was a really good discussion. And I sent an email to all the school committee members with the 2 dates in January, if anybody's available to join for one of those meetings in January.
Yeah.
And we did apologize afterwards, making them listen to us talk about the budget for an hour. But they had really good questions.
Really good questions.
Really good
They really
questions.
did.
And I just think, and we talked about this, how useful it is. I mean, for anybody to understand to that level, I mean, they now have a much greater understanding of how our budget works. And I just think, I mean, some of them are current voters or future voters, and I think it was a really good conversation, and hopefully we didn't bore them too much, but enjoyed being there with them, yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for those updates. And that brings us to our 7:25 agenda item, which is the Anti-Semitism Proclamation and Holocaust Education. We have Joe Diamond, and we're going to bring in Magali, our Director of Equity, Curriculum, and Instruction, as well via Zoom.
Is Andrea on there too?
She's not.
Can I sit here? Yes,
We
please.
would love that, Joe. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you. It's great.
Appreciate
to be
you
here.
coming.
Before I get started and talk to you about what the DEI committee proposed and what the select board approved, which is very gratifying, on behalf of the DEI committee, I wanted to thank you on behalf of my kids who went to Westford schools from the very start, through the high school, into college. Now they've graduated, and I've never had the chance to thank you for that. So we very much appreciate this school system. We moved here because of the school system in 1993. And have sort of grown up with it. And through you, I'd like also to thank Principal Antonelli for all of his work. He's just wonderful. It was wonderful. We thought during the time that my kids, who are my daughters, who are, like I say now, young adults. So I never had the chance to formally thank anybody. So I wanted to thank you here. And this is my opportunity to do that. It sounds like there might be some other folks on the Zoom. Is that right?
Yes, can you see?
Oh, yeah.
Magali.
Yeah,
Magali's
Magali is there.
Oh, good. Okay.
She's waving.
She and I spoke earlier today. It was a great
Oh,
conversation.
that's it.
There we go.
There we go. Nice and full size.
Thanks. I know that the agenda item is meant to be a discussion, and so I won't take too long. I imagine that you are familiar or aware of the fact that the Select Board approved a proclamation that the DEI committee brought to it related to addressing anti-Semitism, but with 3 specific parts. If I could just provide a little bit of background, the DEI committee, as you probably all know, is meant to be an advisory group to both the Select Board and the schools, and takes that role very seriously. It's a committee that's diverse itself and brings to the table a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the town of Westford. And we feel like we got a running start anyway, because Westford is a sort of a welcoming and peaceable community. But there is always opportunity to raise awareness and take steps that will continue to raise that awareness and make a community even better at that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This particular recommendation actually emanated from a webinar that Jody Ross sent around to us in March this year. And by the way, I also want to thank Jody for her work too. She has been wonderful with the DEI committee and with me. I just find her to be incredibly able and just a wonderful public servant. So I will miss her, as I know everybody else will. The recommendation at this webinar was for communities across the Commonwealth to do 3 things in the form of that would be part of a proclamation. The first is to declare that January 27th is Holocaust Remembrance Day, that the month of January is Holocaust Education Month, and that cities and towns adopt a definition of anti-Semitism. And that definition just really quickly reads that anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed against Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property toward Jewish community institutions or religious facilities. We actually talked about it a few times at the DEI committee level, and then in October it was approved that we would bring this to the Select Board. We didn't have a Westford-specific proclamation, but we did articulate these 3 parts of what a proclamation would be, and then the Select Board, approved those 3 parts on that night. Proclamation was approved just recently as well in December at its meeting, and you can see the proclamation right there. It's important on a couple of levels, and I think the reason it's important is because it's the kind of thing that becomes more important as it moves around the state. So the more communities that adopt this, in fact, the governor signed a proclamation to this effect, Beverly, Peabody, Milton, Sharon, and maybe other communities in Massachusetts, but there are 60 or so across the country that have done this. And the more communities that adopt this, the better, so that there becomes sort of a standard understanding or a common understanding of what anti-Semitism is. We thought this was important to do because of not only the rise of anti-Semitism across the world, across the country, even in Massachusetts, and we've experienced it here in Westford, but we also thought it was important to do because I think it allows us all to not only take a stand against anti-Semitism, but all forms of intolerance. And I think it represents that as well. When we spoke with the Select Board, great conversation. One of the suggestions was, let's not limit this education to 1 month. Let's think about this as a possible opportunity to build on what already exists in the curriculum. And I understand that is the case. This would build on what already exists in the curriculum. And so I think that was Scott Hazelton's suggestion, and I took it to heart. I think it makes a ton of sense. Anita Tanakaran Wynn, who's the chair of the DEI committee, I think reached out to you, Chris, and I was able to talk to Magali today. about that very thing, which is that this is sort of a platform or a jumping off point for adding to, incorporating in the curriculum across the schools in an appropriate way. It could start in elementary school, middle school, high school, and even the library could be a partner in this. And it doesn't have to happen overnight either, because there are lots of resources that are available from the American Jewish Heritage Museum, the Holocaust Museum, the Lapin Foundation, and others have curriculum or content that can be drawn on. So that's really it as far as information is concerned. I didn't want to take up too much time because I know it's limited, and would be happy to talk about this a little bit more. We're happy to work with the school, work with Magali and others to start this process. And I know she's on the line, so let me stop now.
Well, I want to thank you for your leadership on this. I've been really heartened and happy to see this moving through and being brought to the select board and now here, and just thankful for that. And it's just such an important thing and it's a good time to underscore this, right? Like you said, these are things that we feel like, yes, they're being covered in our curriculum, and you'd like to think in a community like Westford, these are things that we sort of have a common understanding and appreciation of. But this is just to underscore it like this just feels really important and significant now more than ever. And anyway, I think I'm really thankful for this, and I think we have January coming up, and like you said, over time we'll see how this evolves. But I'm glad you're here tonight. I'm glad that Magali is here tonight, and that we can start the conversation. Yeah, thank you. And I'm gonna stop screen sharing so that we can see Magali. But I want to open it up to other comments and or questions from the committee. Magali, you're with us, right? You can hear us okay, correct? Okay, great. We see you, so we're glad you're here.
If you have any questions about part of our discussion today, there was a lot of connections and overlap with the curriculum and the idea of enhancing the diversity, equity, and inclusion within our hiring as well. So there's two prongs there that we can potentially tackle this through. So if you want, I can elaborate on some of those connections, or wait for some Q&A.
I think that'd be great if you want to just continue and talk a little bit about how that conversation went and what you're seeing from your perspective.
Sure. So I did have a fruitful conversation with Joe today. He did send some resources similar to some of the resources that we had started compiling as soon as this was assigned to me through the superintendent. What is interesting is Joe bringing forth the holistic approach throughout the curriculum, throughout the year, not just in this month. And also being more inclusive about all forms of intolerance. We see the equity work being done and carried through our curriculum and through our hiring process. In some of the materials that Joe shared, there was a nice connection to the Universal Design for Learning. I think Joe used the word multimedia. In UDL, we say multiple forms of representation and actions and expression. So the resources that he provided were well-rounded in a sense that it would lend itself nicely with the UDL planning framework. There's videos, there's artifacts to look at, there's print, text, audio, so primary resources and so on. We also talked about bias and how we can have that implicit bias. One of the things that I think stuck with me today from our conversation was the cultural proficiency across the district or across the community of Westford. One example in particular is in the Indian culture. The swastika is a symbol of hope. But after it was, after it was adopted by the Nazis, it changed its meaning, and now it has a more derogatory feel to it. So that, when people display those types of symbols that mean something different in their culture, we may misinterpret that across the community, and that's where we get more misunderstandings and confusion. So I see a lot of overlap in our curriculum work with this, and working together with the town to perhaps utilize some of the resources and other venues like the library, and thinking about creating maybe some affinity groups, maybe doing a common community book read. We talked about, what are some actions that we can take that would give us some quick wins, maybe in the spring moving forward, starting in January. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us, and that we're primed to go deeper and come at it through the equity lens and using the Universal Design for Learning to expose and provide our learners with really, really strong resources in studying anti-Semitism and building that culture of beyond tolerance. Like, we want to even move beyond tolerance. We want acceptance. So that's something that we need to work towards, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Magali.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Committee, do we have questions?
No, this was a great conversation to participate in, and the DEI meeting, I was there when Joe proposed it, and
Yep.
so I think it's a great thing that's moving forward.
There's clearly a lot of thought and intentionality gone in behind this, so and I think it's really well written, the resolution, so thank you. I think it's
It's a resolution that is, or a proclamation that's taken from Danvers and Peabody.
Oh,
Okay.
So they were the inspiration for us. I just wanted to thank Magali for talking with me today. When we started this process, and my gratitude extends to the DEI committee and to the select board for being so open to this and supportive, frankly. But when we talked today, it just reminded me that the best that we can do is bring the idea forward, to make a proposal, to create a framework perhaps, but to rely on a partnership, and to rely, frankly, on the expertise of people like Magali, because I don't know how to create a curriculum, but we can certainly be supportive, and I wouldn't presume to want to, design a curriculum, but our enthusiasm is there, our commitment is there, and information too. So this is wonderful, and we stand ready to help. This is a teachable moment, I think, for all of us, and I think that we can sort of take those opportunities. And when I use the word multimedia, there are art installations, there are videos, there are books, short pamphlets, and so on that we can take advantage of. So I thank you, and as I say, we stand ready to get to work.
Did you have some?
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
just to, Joe's use of the word partnership had me thinking when the next staff DEI meeting is and how that will be looped in to that group.
Well, the next one will be in January,
Okay.
and we'll.
And we have some overlap, right, in membership?
What we tried to do is, we don't necessarily have overlap in membership. What we've tried to do is we make sure that we were extending invitations specifically to the members of the DEI committee that were on the education subcommittee.
Sure.
We're extending invitations for them to kind of join our conversations. And this year specifically, the focus of our conversations has been about the strategic district improvement plan. So that's kind of what we've been doing with the first couple of meetings, was kind of looking at the way in which we were responding to the priority areas and different things like that. But I feel like I think the good thing is that what we've come to learn over the last year is how important it is to be able to have a continued partnership, right? And continued making sure that we're not just thinking, oh, that conversation happened, right, past tense, but like making sure that we're just staying available to have multiple conversations.
Yeah.
I can, if it's okay, Chris, to add, I know we've spoken with the town DEI about some of their members joining us in the school DEI, but the biggest obstacle, unfortunately, as a number of the members expressed, is that we are currently doing in person, and it's typically around 3 o'clock on a Thursday, so it's not easily accessible for a lot of those members. So I know we kind of talked about looking at hybrid options, and
Yeah, we were going to, our December meeting was going to be
but it has to be
remote, which would just kind of allow us to do that, and we needed to cancel it, but the January meeting will be remote.
Yes.
And we have also learned how to use the owl, because you showed us how to plug it in.
Right.
So then we'll be able to have a true hybrid, because it was actually interesting, because, all of our meetings were remote.
Yeah.
And then it was one of those scenarios where we actually were having in-person meetings, which was great. But then we're like, there is a benefit to still being able to have this, because some people weren't able to access it at that point.
Yeah. Great.
So I'm glad that, did you want to?
I wanted one other question,
Yeah,
if that's,
please.
I'm
Yeah.
actually just curious as to what, I don't know, Joe or Magali or Dr. Chu, if you have thought or kind of considered how we disseminate this, because again, I love the fact that this has been produced and the town of Westford is behind it and there's a lot of thought, but not all teachers from WA or Stony Brook or even, Miller or Robinson were in this meeting today. So how do we make sure that this information is getting out to teachers, to just make sure that there's an awareness that this is something that the school committee, the town DEI, the select board have all come together to say this is really important. I mean, and the fact that public schools is mentioned in the resolution. So I'm just curious as to kind of what that next step is.
Well, I can speak first, and then Magali can kind of share a little bit more, but the genesis of the information, or the information that Magali has, came also from, she went to collect what are people already doing, right? So she went and talked with the curriculum coordinators, who then were able to say, these are the things that have been taking place, not in the month of January per se, which is one of the things you had mentioned, right? Like, 'cause we were kind of big on that same, on the same idea that we're not going to limit this to 1 month, but so I feel like collecting that information to find out what types of things were already taking place within our curriculum, and then Magali can speak more about, like, she was sharing why she was asking for this information, right? So I feel like that process has already started, in terms of saying, hey, let's now maybe some teachers might want to rethink when they're doing things, if they can capitalize on sort of the collective conversation, but others, it might not then have to take place in January. They could still have it take place at the original time where they had it taking place, but they could now be connecting it to these different types of events, and or I think bringing things where most of the pieces we're finding this might exist in a specific content area, and one of the things we'll try to do is how can we expand this through multiple content areas and find different connections. But I don't know, does that, I'll kick it to you, Magali.
You summed it up pretty well. So yes, that was the first charge, was kind of capturing what's already happening within the district. And I agree with you, what is going well at some grade levels, and then how can we scale that out to other grade levels in a developmentally appropriate way. Some of the library media specialists also gave us some submissions of things that they also have in June. So that's important. So I have communicated with the curriculum coordinators. They're really good about making sure that we message the January month awareness club and the 27th in their monthly newsletters, to also push out to the principals to also share some of that information within their newsletters. So we're going to try to keep that line of communication ongoing, and it will. I think it will be nice to see what we learn at the end of January, and then reflect and adjust and I would say amplify for the following year as we are committed to this. But this year will be a learning and awareness, and I think that we've already started that line of communication, but it is important that it gets to the teacher level.
Yep. That's great, Magali, because I think what I heard in your question was less about sort of the long-term, like how we infuse it into the curriculum, but more about this very specific moment where we have this proclamation, which is nice and succinct.
Okay.
And I think that's what you finish with there, is that principals will have this, can push it out. Because I think it's to your point, it's just really helpful for people to see it. It's got the definition, which if we don't have that common foundation that we're working from of what we're talking about, then, you know, like that's what we build on. So I think getting that out to as many of our educators as possible is a great start in getting ready for January.
And you might find, like we did, that there are ideas out there and opportunities that we didn't know about and that people have, but just didn't have a platform or a spark to bring them forward. So I think that's a wonderful idea. And we're happy to be helpful with any rhetoric. There's a summary at the Westford website, which might be helpful, but I think that's wonderful. I also want to thank Andrea Parner-Sweet for her leadership of the Select Board and helping us to present this as well.
And now that you two have connected, I think that's great. Let us know what more we can do. I think one thing that at some point we'll want to hear about things as they come, like what initiatives look like, what things might be happening in the schools. So I think keeping in mind when a good time for that would be, like a good time to come back, and it doesn't have to be, you know, it could be a full agenda item. It could be through superintendent updates occasionally if there are smaller things that percolate up. But I think we'll all be interested to hear like where we go from here, with the recognition that it's a long-term, enduring thing that we're trying to build.
I think that's the key framework. It is a process, and I'll report back to the DEI committee, and certainly they'll be really happy to hear about our conversation, and then their input too is important in this. So I thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out. Thanks for all your work.
Pleasure. Thank you, Magali.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a pleasure. I learned a lot too.
Same here.
Thank you for waiting for the agenda item too.
Yeah, appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
And Magali, unless you want to be larger than life on our screen here, we're going to put you, I'll move you back to attendee role so you can lurk or do whatever you need to do, okay?
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm still not used to the faces and then the voice.
Yeah, I know.
I'm like, wait, okay.
We need to pull the screen down there.
And I don't know if Magali from home, you're attending now, so you can't answer, but if you could see how large your projector.
Yeah.
You know, I think when I've been home
Shows
for
a
these, it's
picture.
always that moment where you see yourself, you're like, oh man, that's
That's big.
kind of ridiculous. But thank you. We're going to move on to our 7:45 agenda item, which is the FY24 budget discussion. We've got some materials in the packet, and we invite our finance director, Jenny Len, to join us at the table. Thank you. Thank you for all the work in developing all the materials in the packet, which answered, at least for me, a lot of questions and were really helpful.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind. I'd love to dive in for a second because Jenny and I had talked a little bit. Finance subcommittee was scheduled to meet, and we didn't because of conflicts, but Jenny and I had aligned on sort of what sort of supplemental budget documents could be helpful to create as like the next round of discussion prompts, right? And I mean, I'm blown away because every time I show her like, well, there was this like a couple years ago that showed all the offsets, and she's like, oh, here it is, great, I did it. And then I showed her, I had saved from a previous year like this summary line with like the note, right, showing like any big changes in percentage and a quick like explanation. And she's like, yep, I can do that. And so it just really blown away. Thank you so much. I feel like everything that we've asked for has just been created quickly and thoroughly. And I really appreciate your performance. It's just been great.
You're welcome, because actually those are the answer we are trying to prepare to answer all of your questions.
Right.
So that's something we already have something working in progress. So we are trying to provide as much information as we can to give you all those answers for those percentage difference and dollar difference.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had the same exact thought that Valerie had, because as I was going through the budget memo, I was like, oh, it'd be really helpful to have a spreadsheet, and I looked at the next document. I'm like, oh,
There it is.
Like spreadsheet,
Yes.
right, just like that, perfect, yeah, so thank you.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
You're reading our minds.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for Valerie's suggestion for that spreadsheet with explanation of those difference. I think that's very convenient and helpful for everybody.
Yep.
And just a reminder to the committee, I know Gloria has used it, because I'm looking, but we do have a way to submit questions from the committee members. You have a link, and those can then go to administration and kind of inform what future budget presentations and conversations might need to include. And so that's sort of why we do that, is to have an idea of what's on our minds. Certainly, we're also here right now and can ask those, any number of those questions now, but it's nice in between our meetings to have that opportunity when you think of something to submit that, and so we can start looking. And some things take some lead time
Right.
to figure out as well, and so that's helpful to have those ahead of time.
I don't have a solution for this, but I will just reflect that it is challenging to devote budget review energy at this time of year. So with everyone's family, schedules and everything. So there's no solution, clearly, because we're back to the usual annual town meeting schedule. But yes, I apologize because I have not submitted any questions.
I think we know it's a budget process,
Right.
and things will percolate up at different times as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there were, from the materials we had in tonight's packet, which we did not have the last meeting, if there are questions that raised. Gloria, I don't know if you want to ask any of the questions that you submitted.
I put some in this afternoon. Obviously, I'm not expecting answers on that tonight because I just put them in this afternoon. But I mean, I think they were questions related to some of the variances and some of the changes. But like I said, those have been submitted, and yeah, I wouldn't expect answers on those on the floor. But I think that variance document was incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
You have not shared that with us yet.
I have not, sorry.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, just want to be, because for a moment there, I was like,
Yeah.
are we supposed to be reading it,
Those are
or?
the first submissions, and I will be
Gotcha.
honest, I need to set it up where I get a notification,
Okay.
or maybe I can set up where you get a notification, so that they can just go
Yeah.
straight to you.
Well, and I started putting them in, and I actually emailed Chris and Valerie and said, I'm not
FYI.
expecting answers on these
Yeah.
tonight. It's just, I'm doing the prep now, so I'm putting them
Yeah,
in now
so
while they're fresh in my mind. But
That's
yeah,
great.
that was just
great.
this afternoon.
I'd be interested in just any conversations that have maybe happened within the school level or leadership level. I mean, I know it doesn't create itself in a vacuum in administration, but I'm just curious, has there been any conversations or queries or anything from the school side, from the schools and principals and staff themselves?
Not since our presentation.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess, because that's a thing, like we had sort of, the principals were aware of what we were going to be presenting. So I know that they then were able to have conversations with the staff that where some moves might take
Yeah.
place. But in general,
Awesome.
there hasn't really been too much discussion or
No,
questions. No.
that's good too.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just add to that, and I sent this over, sorry, I bypassed the Airtable submission.
Life
But
goes on.
it was more a discussion point instead of a direct question. But I was just thinking about, as we revisit the budget tonight, from a viewer's point of view or a taxpayer's point of view or someone in the community that sees us with a gap, right? And just thinking about how, whether or not, or how to explain this gap sort of differently from last year's 800 XX gap, and you know what we see as the next steps, I think is just important to reiterate sort of every meeting until that reaches its next step. So if you want to speak to that, I
Yeah,
think that would be
so
really
one of the differences last year was that when we first originally drafted and prepared the budget, there was a much bigger difference, right? And we shared that information with the town manager and the director of finance, and while we were still in the process of looking to see where we could make adjustments, we were also making it clear to them that we weren't going to be able to, that our request was not going to be able to be supported by what they thought that their allocation was going to be at that moment in time. But the conversation was very much, we were still going to see what we could do, and they were going to see what they could do in order to sort of meet in the middle. And this year, the difference is significantly less than it was last year. And when we met with them, the conversation has not been about, oh, well, what are we going to possibly do to bridge this divide, if you will. The first thing that was mentioned is that just the idea that the allocation that the town manager had prepared, or within her presentation that she had shared on the 13th, it was the 13th, right? I think it was the 13th, was allocating 2.5% to the schools. And so they had last year, they were only initially able to allocate 2%. We eventually ended up with a 2.7% increase. So there was that difference, but we were much closer to what their allocation was in the first place this year. And then when we had shared that, you know, we really need a 2.9, which is that $266,000, that's when some of the things that were mentioned during the presentation were shared with us, that if the select board was to decide to use some of the ARPA funds for the, I believe it's for the emergency communications, the I can't remember the exact title of it, but that would, if they chose to fund that with ARPA, then that would alleviate a certain amount within our operating budget. And so what Town Manager Jody Ross had shared was that then something like that would be able to help us bridge this gap. And so there's also other variables that sometimes exist when they know exactly what the state aid is. So I guess the short version to your question would be, I think a big difference was that last year there was a little bit of, well, both sides we're not really sure necessarily how we're going to do that. And this year, there isn't that same feeling. It's, well, okay, let's look to see what is available, and then we believe that we can figure this out.
Okay.
So I haven't been charged with going back to figure out how I can reduce our request by a certain amount. I mean, at the same time, I will say, she also clearly said that she was allocating 2.5. So we do know that there is that difference, but it isn't the same, it isn't the same dilemma, I think, that existed last year, where we were still really looking to see what else can we do to sort of shrink this scenario.
Okay, awesome.
Do we think by our next meeting there'll be any additional clarity? I mean, I think it's a tricky time with the holidays, and it's a tricky time with a town manager transition, right? Like, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about, you know, when we're getting our new town manager.
I don't necessarily think that we will, because what we actually also saw was, you know, the town manager presented her budget to the select board, and now they have to have discussions, right? So that they didn't have any discussion really at that moment in time either. So I'm not sure if we'll have new information. Our next meeting's January 3rd, and I'm not sure if we'll have new information at that moment in time. I don't know, but I that's why I'm under the impression that unless you have specific concerns with the budget as presented, then I'm prepared to answer questions, make sure that there's clarity, make sure that people understand what it is that we've proposed, and then continue the conversations with the select board and with the finance committee.
When do they meet?
They start
Do they
the
start on the
second
3rd or the-
Thursday.
Yeah.
They start on the second Thursday of January.
For their budget hearings.
For the
Yes.
budget hearings. Yeah,
Do they
Or-
meet on the 3rd also, though? Do we have a conflict?
that's a great question. They just
think
approved
they
their
do,
2023.
I don't think they do. I thought they said that they were meeting after that. I thought
Yeah,
maybe,
that's why I
maybe
couldn't
the,
remember. I
maybe
know they
the,
told us,
maybe
but-
the 10th or,
Yeah, that might be right. I don't remember thinking that there was a conflict with us on the
Right.
3rd, but.
They're meeting on the 27th.
The 10th.
they're meeting on the 27th, and I think then the 10th would be their next
September's
meeting.
their first
Right.
general meeting, okay.
Right.
Thanks.
24th.
The
right?
24th?
No, the 10th and the 24th. Did you say the 27th?
Right, she said the 20, they do have a meeting on the 27th, December
December.
27th.
Oh,
Oh.
December.
Which is
I'm
why-
Oh,
sorry.
they do, they are meeting.
Got it.
They're
Okay.
meeting on the 27th.
I think we
yeah.
weren't sure if they were meeting.
I was like, a Friday? So confused.
Good to know.
Yeah, right, that would be. So
Yeah.
I imagine, I mean, one of the things we can do is we can, when you have, if people are able to have more questions, and we can certainly, like I said, provide more clarity where needed for the 3rd.
Yep,
Yeah.
that'd be great. Get
Yep.
those questions in. Gloria?
I know, another element of kind of the big picture uncertainty this year is the new governor coming in, the additional time that the new governor has to put forth her budget, and this lingering question of the 14% increase to out-of-district special education tuitions. Do we have any clarity of when the timing of that will come in, and how does that timing impact our timing with approving a budget and presenting it to the voters at town meeting?
No. I'm sorry. I don't, I was
Did I
gonna-
hear it was
That's fair.
January? I had, because
Well, the new governor has an additional 5 weeks.
March
Usually
1st.
January,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
when you have a new governor.
on the tuition
Oh,
increase as well? No?
No,
Okay.
I'm not really sure. What I do know is that we did have a call with the commissioner on last Thursday, and one of the things that he had talked about was he's looking at trying to establish or I guess increase what he is calling a pothole fund, right? The idea acknowledging that if there is to be this significant increase, that many districts would be impacted by that. And so the idea of creating funds that would help alleviate that sort of immediate need. But other than telling us that he was planning to advocate for that, he didn't have any more real information.
Good know. So yeah, the timeline isn't great for our process, for either of
Right.
those.
Right, because pretty soon we have our tentative vote for January 17th.
There's 2 meetings from now.
Right.
Chris, have you considered when you'd like the public hearing? Do you know yet if it's the January 3rd or the 17th?
I thought we do it on the
17th.
17th, before the vote, we would do the official public hearing.
Oh,
Yes?
That's been posted for January 3rd.
Oh.
Huh?
The hearing has?
So if that's going to be changed, then we need to repost.
Okay. I think that makes the most sense. I think, from our discussions, we don't think there's anything that says it has to happen on a calendar day before the committee vote. It just should per our policy, it has to happen before the committee vote. And it has to happen before the town vote, certainly. And so I think if we can do it on the 17th as part of our agenda before our further discussion and vote, that gives us, the best ability to have more information for the public and then for them to comment before we vote. Thank you so much, Nina. Yeah, it's new. Doing it this way is new to us, so we'll kind of, we'll figure out. We'll see how we like it this way. So, yeah. Any other budget discussion? We're in a budget holding pattern. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thank you, Jen. And we'll move on to the ARPA requests from last Tuesday's meeting.
Mhm.
Look, and it's your name on there.
It's my
Did you like
name,
that?
so I will
Sorry about that.
just start talking about it.
Start talking about it.
Select board meeting, well, everybody was invited.
We couldn't
I
see. We
I
couldn't
couldn't see who was there,
Right.
but I
We'll
assume
assume
some of
everyone
you
was there.
may have been in attendance. But just in case you weren't, select board met last week on the 13th and had previously communicated a deadline for ARPA requests of the 5th, December 5th. And then on the 13th had a big chunk of their agenda to review them. They did go through in sort of red all of the new requests, and several of them had been designated as priority, and those were approved that night. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or so of them were approved that night. And although the the supplemental appropriation for unanticipated FY23 school bus transportation costs from our end that was requested was designated as priority. And reminder that that was for the diesel fuel surcharge as part of our contract with D-Bus, as well as the sudden closure of the Beaverbrook Bridge and the additional bus that we needed for that neighborhood. So that was approved at the full amount by the select board. And then, if you'll remember, we had a separate request as a package comprehensive program to promote equity and social emotional health for students and staff in the Westford Public Schools. And it was a multi-pronged approach touching on all the different grade levels and touching on our STIP plan and the differences from the state on suspensions. And the select board decided to approve the calming kits for the PK to 5 classrooms. Also the anxiety support groups that will meet after school at each of the 3 to 5 buildings for small group instruction, and the educational materials supporting trauma-sensitive classrooms. So those 3 were approved. It is not entirely clear when the remaining items would be revisited or what further information we can provide to them, but I will continue to advocate for that.
Thank you.
I think we can reach out and ask when they want us to come back, when they anticipate that they'll take it up again.
Right.
And then we can think about what we think the right presentation of information. Certainly, I think we heard that earlier information could have been beneficial for them, so
Yep. Yep.
that was helpful to hear. And I think, depending on the items, there's any number of for anything from just some text. I mean, on some of the things I was saying for the restorative practices, I've got some videos that I've seen from other districts who are implementing this that I think make it very tangible, and I don't know if that's something that they would, if we put it, got it to them ahead of time, that they would
Sure.
avail themselves of that and take a look at those, but I think that could be helpful. So
Right.
think about that for any of these, what
Yes.
sorts of things we think
Happy
would be
to
most useful.
brain trust on that. And I think one of our messaging points needs to be that it just makes it challenging to plan, right? If there's no clear decision point, because certainly the equity audit, right? We've talked about that and realized the value of it. I mean, I'm not going to go through each one, but there's certainly urgency that we feel and value to each of them that it's hard to have an open-ended decision point. So,
I was just gonna say, I think, if I remember what I heard, right, from that event, is that one of the questions was probably there was some confusion as to the timeliness of things, right? So they asked us, like, when would we be implementing this? And we were able to give them a range, but what they identified were things that can actually happen right away, right? Like materials that'll go directly to impact classrooms, the anxiety support group that we could start as soon as we have all the logistics lined up, whereas the other training pieces and even the equity audit piece is more of a, that wouldn't necessarily happen right away, right? So I feel like we can probably maybe give them a more specific
yes.
timeline.
Yes.
But then the other piece was, I mean, I do think, Anita did a nice job sharing her specific questions and concerns about restorative justice. And I think both Chris and Catherine, I think you did a nice job sort of responding to that and kind of talking again about the proactive piece versus the reactive piece,
Right.
which I think is helpful. But the other pieces didn't have the same type of question mark.
Sure.
Right. There wasn't as much specificity of,
That's right.
of concern or question.
Right.
Right.
I was literally about to say the same thing, because I think if you also look at the other items that they discussed that evening and what they did fund, they were all very tangible things that kind of got that funding, whereas I think, they expressed, maybe needing to have a bit more time to maybe truly understand and kind of dive more into. So I think that definitely came across in that instant impact. I think they found easier maybe to fund or to okay.
And it did, for me, beg the question of, like, could we have talked more about urgency versus importance? I felt like there was a little bit of a favor for urgency, which is that's their prerogative.
Sure.
But I think we can talk about that. Like some of these urgent, no. As far as in a timeliness sense, but
Right.
but we put them on there because we saw their importance.
Right.
There's also some confusion, I would say, from my end. I think some of you would share this as well too, just in understanding what the potential timeline is, right?
Exactly.
Because we're presenting things that we are seeing as an immediate need, as are other people, but then we're also looking at it as we think this is an appropriate use of those funds. So we want to make sure that it's being heard.
Right.
But it's not the same type of, time-sensitive piece of it. And I honestly didn't know if their goal was to try to commit the funds,
Right.
so that they knew where they were going. And then as the conversation went on, I got the impression that I don't think that is the case.
Right.
So then it is, back to your point, Valerie, it's like, well, we'll just pay attention because,
Right.
they know that they have these funds that they need to look at and commit to something, but they have a pretty decent window of when they can do that.
I can imagine that some of the concern would be to commit funds to something that there's not a clear plan how to implement. And so in my experience, there's a reluctance to allocate funds for something if there's not a clear plan, because then it will feel like those funds might be reverted. So I think if we said, like some of the things that you're talking about are things that could be purchased immediately. So it's like, if I give you this, then it'll be implemented. Whereas if there are some other things that have fewer details around implementation, then there might be a reluctance to do that.
Yeah, they didn't state that, but I think that sense,
I think
that sense makes sense.
That's-
that.
Well, and
could
I
be
think-
part of it.
Very common.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
And that's where honestly, I think that
Action
I think some of the reluctance was around restorative practices, just because that what we're articulating is different than what just took place.
Right.
And so we need to really make sure that because I actually think that the having Dr. Ross Green come to a very specific event, that was part of what we're talking about. Having somebody, we can't commit to who would conduct the equity audit, but bringing in somebody outside to do that is pretty specific. But we can be more specific. And I think that there's just a little bit of, still confusion about what the intent is.
I'm wondering, would it be helpful for us to kind of show the select board what are, you know, some examples of previous like equity audits kind of that have been done in maybe other districts to say, you know, when you do this, this is typically kind of the information
Output.
you get and what we would like hopefully do with that information. So just, because I think we, you know, forget that, you know, this is our, we speak this language, you know, every 2 weeks on a daily basis, where select board aren't, you know,
Right.
in the school realm. And so I think it might be maybe some I think, you know, taking the theory and like really what's the practice, like you were saying.
Like, what will be the recommendations that will be implemented after?
After,
an
yeah, so
equity
kind of to
audit?
give them some ideas of
Yeah.
what has been done previously might be
Like,
of
what do you
benefit.
end up with? What's the product?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and some additional specificity in terms of timing, that they may not be aware that if there's certain professional development, like if you want to have
Right, to plan for.
someone like Ross Green.
Right.
You
We
know,
know that
present-
would be a summer thing,
Yeah.
right.
But you gotta book them.
You gotta
But-
book them.
right.
But yeah, so what would be the timeliness if we want to have this professional development this summer, then we need to know by XYZ date
Exactly.
to make those plans. And then that would further clarify the timeliness for them, and I think that would help.
Yep.
The other interesting point that they raised was, I think there was some curiosity about what an equity audit is and the type of feedback that you can get, because I think the town would be interested in partaking in a similar process. Now, what I don't know is if the type of consultants that we would be looking at would be the same type of consultants they would be looking at. Obviously, we would be looking through an educational lens, and we're looking for an education-specific consultant. What I guess I don't know is if those also do a town-wide equity audit, or whether they really are separate. If there is some synergy there, or there's some, you know, motivation to do them collectively through the same group, I think that could be really a valuable town and school collaboration that they would be interested in. I just don't know if really the type of consultants you need are so different anyway.
Right, and
There's gotta be
we
parallel
did-
processes.
Right, we were able to sort of articulate that a little bit more, that we are looking specifically at education, because we're looking at our curriculum, our structures, and things like that. But I think you're right, they were sort of asking, wait a second, not that they were questioning
Right, the need
whether,
for it.
the need for it, as
Yeah.
much as they're like, hey, is this something
sounds
that
like a
could
good idea.
actually have a
Yep.
broader
Yeah.
impact, which I thought was helpful, but, because we have talked in terms of just even the hiring practices and things that we are looking at, in ways that we can
Partner.
sort of, include a larger group, which I think is good.
Yep.
I do think, the only one that I heard the specific concern about, because I think she did a nice job sharing her concern, was Anita's concern with the restorative justice. I think she was very clear. She was able to explain what her hesitation was. The other pieces, I really just felt it was more of a timeline piece, because then they started talking in terms of they want to weigh that against other requests. And that's just what I was confused about, because I sort of thought that they were coming to the end
Right.
of figuring out how they were going to commit things, and now I just feel like they just still have a lot of things that they're looking at.
I think also because they had, I think, you know, rough guesstimate, I think it was about $300,000 more requests than available funding.
I think you're right.
So they probably have to,
Right.
you know, kind of be conscious of that. I mean, it would have been great if it
Right.
was the other way.
Yeah.
Right, I think they had
Just
It would have been
magically
easier.
totaled.
Like that too.
something
Yeah.
like $3.2 million, and they
Yeah.
had $3.5 million
Something
worth
like
of
that,
requests.
yes.
If it was only $2 million worth of requests, then they might have been a little bit more, you know, thinking that, okay, we can look at this, but I think you're right. They,
Yeah.
So they just need to, it's a timely process.
Yep.
Well, and they also have that very large placeholder for the FEMA reimbursement for the
Yes.
the
Right.
COVID public
Yeah,
safety
that's a good
overtime
point.
that had been reimbursed and then
That's
that
right.
stopped. So that they've got that very large placeholder while that's being worked out.
Yeah.
Right, you know.
Would it help if we, and this is more kind of a question to Val, because I know you've been kind of taking point on it, if we kind of tried to put together some sort of dare I say it, a slide deck or something, that could maybe, we could work on over the next couple of weeks, that we could share with the select board that just allows them in their own time to kind of explore through it, and we can, include links and data and information kind of across those three.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I during if anyone stayed on, they had the chair of the Economic Development Committee speak to her request for an economic development coordinator for the town. And that group had put together a memorandum, and it was in the packet, so I was browsing their memorandum to see what sort of information they had pulled together, and made some notes of how that could translate to our requests. So I think that's definitely the next step. Yeah, is some more information. So.
If you need any help, just ask. It's
Yeah,
not all on
well,
you.
and I know it's tough because it's like sort of been coming through finance, right? The subcommittee, but I know we all feel very invested in the whole list of them. So, as needed,
Yep.
team
Just
effort.
ask.
But I think it was good. I think we presented a really good list.
Yes.
I think something we all believed in, and we got some of those things funded right out of the gate, which I was really grateful
Yep.
for that. And I think we heard a little bit more what we need to do next time and what information we can provide. So I look forward to that. and
Yep.
Thanks for
Yep.
Thank you.
thanks for that.
And I need to connect with you on, the anxiety groups are ready to hit the ground running
Yep,
in
good.
January, so we just need to connect with the building leadership, connect the firm with the building leadership, and they have a contract and everything like that, so
Great.
sounds
Fantastic.
like it'll be great.
Wow.
So,
Can I just say on the anxiety groups, because I do know them from a personal experience, but I think it would be nice to share. From my take as a parent, it has run extremely well. And what I've seen and heard that has happened in these groups with that particular firm has been so spot on in what they've been doing. So, as an outsider and a parent seeing what has happened in those groups, I'm really excited at the idea that we're bringing that kind of idea into the after schools, but also I think it's going to be huge for our adjustment counsellors, because I know there is just not enough hours in the day for them to do this kind of work. So that's the bigger win,
Yeah.
I think, on that.
I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
I've been trying not to say the business name just because there's paperwork and contracts and everything to work out, but I hope that by the next meeting we'll be able to give a more detailed update.
Yeah. And they're a local Westford
Yes.
group too, which is
Yep.
nice to keep in mind.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, Policy Subcommittee, P6205,
You're
Virtual
up.
Public Virtual School Student Participation in Extracurricular Activities. I have that memorized, of course.
You're proposing an acronym tonight?
Go on.
Yeah, that just does not lend itself. We'd have to reword the whole thing, and we're not going to do that because we're getting to the finish line on this one.
I know.
We'll get the second reading and the vote at the next meeting. My guess is you don't have a lot of updates to give us because I don't think there has been public comment.
There's no public comment, although there is a little bit of news on the MIAA front. I
Oh,
don't know
that's
if people are
interesting.
curious to hear.
Yeah.
So, a couple of weeks back, apparently MIAA accepted TECA, not the other one, because there's two public schools, the Commonwealth. They accepted TECA as a member of their group, but at the moment it's only allowing for participation in field, track and cross country, and it's going to be managed. Reading kind of the information, it sounds like they're very iffy and are kind of looking to see how this plays out before they look at any other sports. So, and I did think it was interesting that it was just TECA that looked for the membership. So it seems all very tentative and unsure. So it will be interesting to see, but I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So basically, it sounds like a trial of sorts in non-contact sports, right? Like they're
and
going to play it real safe.
The lawsuit of this that was started was by a hockey player. So I thought this was Well, yeah, so it's not the field and track. So I think it's baby steps as they figure this one out. So I'm still confident, even with that change, our policy is solid and is allowing for all and every possibility. So
We're covered no matter what MIA does or how it evolves, but yeah, public comment is still open until Wednesday, so if this is kind of last call for public
Wednesday.
comment
Yeah.
on, which is all accessible on the website. So last call for feedback from the public or leadership if there is anything. And then policy will be meeting on Thursday. We're going to have a remote meeting. And then the policy will be available for second read and final vote at our next meeting in January.
finally.
Did either of you
Very
see that tomorrow the State Board of Education is looking at resolutions for how they define public virtual schools?
We'll be watching it.
Yeah. There's, it does, I'm making it sound bigger than it is. I think if you read through like the list of proposed changes, they're just sort of, defining it differently and adding an attendance requirement and stuff. But it's interesting to see that several of them that were added were what they call single district, I'm forgetting the whole acronym, single district virtual schools, I think, that started in September of 2021.
Yeah.
So I think they're trying to put those under the same umbrella.
Yeah. Well, as we said, even just doing this policy, that whole area of virtual
Right.
public school is just so new.
Yep.
So I'm not surprised that they're having to tighten and readjust and reflect, yeah. There we go. We'll
Any
be-
comments or questions from the committee on P6205, I'm not going to say that.
PSVSSP.
Yay.
Yay.
It's so good. It's airtight, and we look forward to voting to approve it next week, or next meeting, not next week. I won't be here. Okay. Thank you, policy. Have a nice meeting on Thursday.
Thank you.
There we go.
That's all I have on the agenda, folks.
Great. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent.